We're broadcasting.
Fantastic. Let's hope that that people can hear us. I'm going to assume that everybody can hear us. Welcome again, everyone, and thanks for joining. This is obviously our second online meetup that we've done throughout the corona crisis. I hope everybody's safe and well and keeping everybody that they love close to them at these times. We've got a brilliant evening tonight. In fact, somebody posted in the Symfony Dev Slack channel. I really can't wait to see Lorna. She's a fantastic presenter, and they joined on the back of knowing that Lorna was coming in today. So we can't wait to get into that and have Lorna's presentation, of course, followed by Marek as well afterwards. One or two thank yous to say first of all. So thank you to Spinks, who are providing the video infrastructure for tonight. We had one or two teething issues with Zoom, which is why we were a minute or two late getting involved, but thank you to Spinks. Level 5 are sponsoring one of the prizes that we've got tonight. We've got a copy of Martin Fowler's refactoring book to give away, so that will be done as part of the raffle at halftime when we have that. So thank you very much to Level 5, and thank you to my builder for organisation and helping keeping this thing running. So we'll get straight into obviously Lorna's talk now. So I will quit sharing my screen. And we can get on with things. So Lorna, over to you. Thank you very much for coming in and joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me. I feel it's been a little while since I spent a lot of time with the Symfony community. That's clearly a mistake on my part. So I'm super happy to be here and kind of reconnect with a bunch of you and to tell you something that I am excited about working on at the moment. So tonight I'm going to be, I love that Neil said presentation. That's very optimistic. Can you mute, Neil?
Oh, I'm so sorry, yes.
That's right, you're wrestling. I'm not screen sharing. I'm just going to put the output through my camera because we had some teething issues. Yeah, so I'm going to talk about OpenAPI. It's something that has really changed the way that I work. I've been working with APIs for a long time, some of them in Symfony. And I think it's really relevant to all of us as web developers to think about whether it's a traditional API where, we're making our web functionality available to machines in a programmatic sense, or whether it's other types of third-party integrations and stuff like that. It's on my radar because I work at a company called Vonage. You probably know us as Nexmo. We rebranded because that is always fun. So we publish communications APIs, that's what we do. So I talk about APIs all the time. We use OpenAPI. I didn't choose this. It was there when I got there, and it's brilliant. So I want to tell you about it. I'm going to start by asking you to take part in a poll. So we're going to do a poll. I want to know where you are with OpenAPI, with API descriptions. Are you already familiar with the topic? Who am I talking to? Who's here? So I think poll magic will occur. It's not in my control, so fingers crossed. There we go. As if, yeah, the magic did occur. So I want to know where you are, and I want to introduce you to this if you are new to it. Now, you might have heard something called Swagger a few years ago. The standard OpenAPI, I like to say formerly known as Swagger. Chances are if you're saying Swagger today, you don't mean Swagger. That was a proprietary standard from SmartBear, who did loads of really good work with this API description. And they donated that standard to the community and it became OpenAPI. And with a bunch of excellent collaborators, and those are big companies, small companies, individuals, all sorts of different people, we had a version 3 release. That was about 5 years ago. So definitely not called Swagger anymore. You'll sometimes see it in tool naming because SmartBear still use it as a tool. So that's all good. What is OpenAPI? It is a description of your API. And it is a description so complete and verbose that even the machines can understand it. So it's a way of describing APIs in a way that we can then use that as a source of truth for other things. Did you all click on the poll already? Gonna see if we got the results. I hope you were quick. Oh, a bunch of people already working with API descriptions. That is amazing. Quite a lot of people aware of it. Great. Never heard of it. You're in the right place too. I'm just here to see the other speaker. See, I knew we needed this option in our poll. I feel I'm winning. Excellent. So we've got this API description, and what can we do with it? Well, traditionally, we think of API descriptions as being for documentation. So that's where I first ran into it. I think it's probably still one of the best use cases. It was certainly one of the first use cases where you could take an OpenAPI description and generate pretty nice looking web docs. I'm not saying that's not a good use. Actually, I would never consider writing API docs any other way now. But because they're not just docs, they're coming from this formal description, we can do a bunch of other things. So today I'm going to show you, first of all, the spec and the tools that I use to wrangle this thing, technical term. And then I'm going to show you around some of the fun things you can do with it once you've got one. So first of all, let's talk about a spec. Now, the Vonage API specs are all on GitHub. Let's see what my, see if I opened so many windows trying to fix, trying to work out where I could share to and from and how I was going to get my screen on screen. Couldn't find my browser. So these are our API specifications. If you look in the definitions folder, this is all of them. Today I'm going to show you one of the smallest ones, which is, it's called Number Insight. So Number Insight is an API that lets you put in a phone number and find out some stuff about it. The spec for it, as you can see from the header on this file, is 1,115 lines long. I chose it because it's one of our smallest and simplest specs. This tells you everything you need to know about working with OpenAPI, right? Not rocket science, but absolutely verbose and unwieldy. You don't want to work with this thing raw, and neither do I. Actually, I do work with it nearly raw, but like in Vim with folding and that kind of thing. So the best editor to start with when you begin working with this stuff is the editor that you already know, right? Your coders. You already know, you're already super users of whatever it is that you write your code in. Yes, I use Vim. You will never get me to recommend that to anyone else. I love it and won't change. So your favorite is the right thing for you, whether it's VS Code. I've used Atom before. It plugs in nicely to the JetBrains family, so PHP Storm. You've got a bunch of options. Let's have a look. Oh, I should have left VS Code running because it's a bit of a beast to start. Yeah, let's do that. VS Code. In VS Code, I have some of the OpenAPI linters plugged in. So you can see here, let me turn up my font size a bit. You can see here it gives me the syntax highlight and also puts that extra decoration on for indentation. You really, really need the helper syntax when you're working with this much YAML. I am getting better at spotting indents over many different lines, but not great. Having code folding and syntax highlight will help a lot, but start with what's going on in your own editor as a recommended first tool. What's the best tool? You choose. There are also some you can use JSON for OpenAPI, JSON YAML based tools that give you a bit more support. So those are specific to working with OpenAPI. One example would be Stoplight Studio. And I'll drop you a whole load of links to deal with this. Wow, this font size is tiny. There's no way you can see this. Okay, bigger. Oh, it got a little bit bigger, but not much. Let's see if I can make this better for you. Oh, it's responsive. Excellent. Okay, well, we'll just scroll a lot. I've got a pointing device here. So this is Number Insight. And you can pick the spec that you want from the left, and that shows you, that closes the file you're working on, thanks. And that shows you the different routes that we have available, what you can do with it. So you can scroll down here. This validation is taking up too much space. No, can't resize it, never mind. You can scroll down here, you can look at individual endpoints. You can see the fields that are in these endpoints. I could, before it was tiny. And you can click the preview to see the spec as it's rendered. So you can see here's the fields that I need to send in the authorization. Every endpoint has the format in the URL. And these are the query parameters that we're going to send. See the try it button? That does what you think it's going to do. I've got some other tricks to show you. Tools like this, which kind of give you a more human user interface, really help you to work with OpenAPI. I like Stoplight, and I think we're going to try and standardize on this and learn it more as a team. If you haven't seen it, I'd really recommend it. Now, if you look down in the bottom half of my screen, I have some error messages. They're actually just warnings. And if you look very closely over here, it says powered by Spectral. Spectral's an open source project. It's written in JavaScript, and it's a linter. This is what we use to make sure that our specs all do what we expect them to do. Now, you can use it here in Stoplight Studio, which is nice, but that relies on everybody who works with your specs using the same tool. It's also a standalone tool. You can install it with NPM and then run it from the command line. So, oh, I've lost my terminal. It's around here somewhere. Not that one. This one. Too many windows and only one screen share. So this is Spectral. I'm running lint on the OpenAPI, the Number Insight spec. You can see I've got a bunch of warnings here. It's mostly warning me about operation tags, and it's also warning me about a valid content schema example. I'm not that bothered about the warnings. So I can turn off some of these rules. If I run it like this with the -s, then you can see I can turn off those valid schema example errors. I'm not bothered. We don't have them in our specs yet, so I'm turning those rules off while I work on it. And so now I have this. This is useful because you don't need any special tools to work with it. You edit the YAML, you run this standalone tool. That's all you need. You can also fit it into your continuous integration pipelines, which is really, really important when you're working with this stuff all the time. Awesome. Now, you've seen the specs. I'm going to do a quick poll. We are working with YAML. You can also do this with JSON. It doesn't matter which one you do. And I'd love to know which one you prefer. I didn't choose YAML. I think I could argue passionately in favor or against either JSON or YAML. It's very much a matter of choice. As you can see, I got a third troll option, as I saw Joe call it, in my poll, just because, you know, I think you're a community with a sense of humor. We'll find out if I'm right about that. I'm also watching the chat, so if you've got questions as I go through, please just type, and I will take them when I can. There's a Q&A window somewhere, but I haven't seen that for a bit. Here it is. Okay, can we get the GitHub URL? Yeah, absolutely. There's a button for type answer. So I'm going to type this while you vote on the poll. When I say type, I mean go and copy and paste it from the other screen, right? Oh, that's not focused correctly. Over here, this one. Excellent. Ready, paste. Good. And now let's have a look at the result of the polls. Oh, it's a close run thing. Oh, okay. That's really interesting. I expected to have a lot of YAML recommendations in the Symfony community. So it's good to know that you're all so well-rounded and open to new things. That is awesome. Yeah, I'm working with YAML, like I say, but I don't feel strongly about it. So think about what we have here. A few thousand lines of YAML, which describe every aspect of the spec. So we've got, in fact, let me just go back and you can have a quick look around. I'm going to scroll, which I know can be hard to follow, but we'll give it a try. We've got the beginning section here, the info section tells you, it's just like an overview. What is this? Where are its docs? How do I get in touch with the developers? What version are we on? That kind of stuff's really important. When you use tools that help to create OpenAPI specs, or you create them from scratch, lots of tools don't render all of these fields, and the temptation is to skip on some of them. Don't skip the metadata, right? OpenAPI in the future will be the way that we discover new APIs. We'll be putting our specs into catalogs for people to find us and integrate with us. So don't skip on the metadata, because it's a note to future other developers and possibly yourself. The next interesting bit here is paths, which starts here on line 24. We have a URL. We can have some parameters that are common to all of the verbs, and then we start stacking verbs here. So I've got a path, which is basic, and then the format. Allegedly, this API also supports XML. I only ever use it with JSON. Everything has a unique operation ID. This is used in all sorts of places. So name things really well. It's used not just in titles and internal hyperlink names, but when you come to generate code, it's also used in method names and that kind of thing. So we describe some stuff you can imagine. This ends up in the docs. We've got a list of parameters, and then we describe the responses that we can get back. Notice this, $ref. OpenAPI has the ability to refer to things declared in other places. So something like this format parameter is used on every endpoint. I shouldn't have to copy paste this format parameter all over my description as I would with documentation. So the compiler assists us by allowing us to have reusable definitions. The key of a great API is consistency. So I love this feature because I feel like it really encourages it. Let's go and have a look at this components parameters section. Of course, I'm on GitHub, so there's no code folding, but here we go. Components, parameters, format. This is that format parameter. We've got a description, we've got an example, and we've got some actual schema specs. So if it has to be a string or has to be a number or has to be within a certain range, you can describe all of that here. The tools that work with your API can then enforce that on the client side. It makes your integrations so much smoother. One thing I really appreciate about OpenAPI is this example field. It encourages you to show the user how it's used. For example, with phone number, the description says a single phone number that you need insight about in a national or international format. I don't really know what that means, but the example shows me a UK formatted phone number starting with a 44 and no plus. I can instantly see what it's for. So the examples lend themselves really well to documentation, and you'll see them in a few other places too. I've waffled about documentation. Let's see some real documentation. So first up, I'm going to show you a tool called Redoc. It's one of my favorites. And don't put it on that window. Over here. Good. I got two screens. One of them's being shared. Where did the script go? On the other screen. Excellent. Okay, so this is the number insight that you've just seen the description for. Here's the basic number insight endpoint that we just looked at the path entry for. Here's the example of the format and the example of the number. So we can generate the documentation here and immediately work with it. I think this is quite responsive too. There's normally examples somewhere. Here's the example. It's responsive as well. Did you know responsive was a verb? It's responsive. It's here. It's normally in the right-hand pane. So you may recognize this API format, API docs format. So you can see there's a response. It's in JSON. The sample response looks like this. It describes everything you can expect. Some of the specs also describe errors or different types of responses you might get for different types of objects that are returned by your API. The nice thing about using OpenAPI as the source for your documentation is the separation between content and presentation, because you can use any different tool that you want to. If I go back over here and instead of running Redoc, I run a tool called Nexmo OAS Renderer. This is a Nexmo/Vonage tool. The browser is not only on the wrong desktop, it's also not loaded. There we go, that's better. Same source, same endpoints, basic number insight, same idea, same basic thing. So there's the response squeezed in the side there because I've turned the font size up huge. And again, the path parameters, how do I scroll? There we go. You can see, oh, I need to send the API key, the API secret, a number. This is how we describe our APIs. Amazing. So even if I stopped here and said, OpenAPI is great, you should use it for your docs, you'd all go away feeling like you'd learned something new. I'm going to take a question from chat, and then I'm going to show you a few more things that I like to do with my OpenAPI spec. Mark is asked, hi Mark, hello. Mark is asking, I'm wondering what your opinion is of generating OpenAPI specs via annotations in code as opposed to hand editing. I would still design first versus code first, just for generation. I think if you're having problems with stoplight, try it again. Wait for the 2.0 release and then try it again. It's a couple of weeks away. I think it's imminent. I absolutely hate code generation. And that's really interesting, particularly in this community where you do so much with annotations. And in fact, I feel like if anyone can do this right, it probably is the Symfony community, right? Because you know how to maintain things that are not your code in your code. Or lots of other communities and other tech stacks don't really do that. So like Java developers, Symfony developers probably could handle it. Everybody else would rather they didn't try. The reason I dislike it is because OpenAPI is so much about examples and also all these different summary fields and descriptions, they're microcopy, right? For documentation, they are in their own right very important. I work with tech writers, they are a gift for this stuff. It is hard. And I don't really, first of all, I love to have really exhaustive examples. Number Insight isn't the one with the most examples. You want to see examples, look at Verify API, the spec, not the rendered version. Having all of that stuff in your code base is going to get on your nerves. If you don't have a spec and you want to have one, by all means generate a starter spec, but then I'd rather it went the other way. I'd rather for each new thing or each change, you generated the stubs and then fleshed it out with the business logic. So I'd rather that you did it that way around. Generating, if you're retrofitting an API spec, works pretty well. Generating as like a maintenance thing, not really awesome. And I'd prefer to see the spec as the single source of truth. I also think starting with the spec is exactly how you do design first. You've seen, oh, you can generate docs from it. This is perfect. You don't give a spec to engineering and then just hope, right? Everyone can get in on the design phase and understand it. The product people, the business people can get in with the documentation. It's complete. They've understood it. It leads us to have conversations about what to do with errors or other edge cases. However, as an engineer, I can also generate a mock server and poke at it with curl exactly as I would when I'm meeting a new API for the first time. Oh, what happens if I do this? What happens if I do that? What happens if I change the format? Wait, that's completely different. Hang on, this error message makes no sense. That's not what I did wrong, right? I can do that because I've got the spec, and it's much cheaper to change things or fix things at that stage. So I am all about spec first. If it's generated spec or no spec, do it, right? It's not a crime, but it's not my preference. This was a huge tangent. Thanks, Mark. Okay, good. Another thing I want you to know about these specs is, you see this big black download OpenAPI 3 button? Click it, get a YAML file. And this is, remember, you can come to this API reference documentation as a customer. You want to integrate, in fact, I didn't put the Nexmo Vonage, we've rebranded, Vonage coupon in the chat, but I can. If you need Vonage credit, prompt me when I've finished and I'll put it in. Download OpenAPI 3 definition, and I get the downloaded number insight here. With this file, as a complete outsider interested in using this API for the first time, I can, for example, import it into Postman, which I did remember to open first. Oh, but I didn't delete the collection. Let's just pretend that wasn't already here. Go away. So the way this works in Postman is you use the import button. I'm importing a file. It is this one that I just downloaded. Import, right? Never seen this API before. Too many open tabs. Don't you start with too many open tabs. I've got too many open windows. Go away. Don't save. Right. No, no, right, good. So here we have, did that not import, or did I just press the wrong button? Huh. Sorry, I am going to press that button again because I feel like I confused myself there. Here it is. Yes. Please import. There it is. Number Insight API. Good. So within the Number Insight API is a basic number insight endpoint, and we can go ahead and use this API. We've got a base URL here. We've got, I need to put in the number. So we'll look up a real number. This is my burner work phone. I rotate when bad things happen to it because I use it on demos all the time. There's a couple of things. I need to have my creds here as well. So I need to add my API key. So I'm using the Postman environment variables stuff. So it can just add my API key and API secret here. And it also sets the base URL correctly. API secret, I've not spelled that right. API secret. Tristan says he likes companies with APIs that also give Postman collection downloads. Yeah, Tristan, I'm on the fence. We've been publishing this OpenAPI collection. I'm not sure what I would get from publishing a Postman collection as well, because I want ready-made API requests that I can send, and I've got those. This setting is wrong. I want my real live creds. Okay, and we'll press send. That's the response from the real API. So from downloading the spec, opening the request, filling in my creds and the other variables that I want to send, here's the API response. So in terms of trying out a new API or allowing people to try out your new API, I love this. I'm with Tristan that a quick start in Postman is super valuable, but I haven't understood why I should maintain an extra Postman collection. So answers in the chat for that. There's a question in the Q&A section. I read you can spoof a number. Would this help in any way to catch it? So this is not a product pitch, but I'm going to answer the question anyway. The Number Insight API gives you, we've got 3 endpoints, basic, standard, and advanced. They give increasing amounts of information and they cost increasing amounts of money. This will tell you if it's a real one and not much else. So it can help you to validate phone numbers. The standard Number Insight one In fact, if we just flip the URL, because it is really that similar. Alexa, stop. Really, no one invited you. The standard one will give you a little bit more information, and the carrier might help. So yeah, hopefully that answers that question. What else is going on? Good. So importing into Postman is a massive use case for OpenAPI. And again, I could stop here and that would be great. I want to show you one more thing before I wrap up. And that is a tool called Prism. Now it's built in Stoplight Studio. You've got like a mock server button, but again, it's available as a standalone tool, which is the way that I usually use it. It's a mock server. So it reads the OpenAPI spec, starts a local web server and says, hello, I am pretending to be the Number Insight API. Ask me anything. And then when you send requests to it, it responds with mock responses. So that's really, really useful. So for example, the advanced version of Number Insight costs money. I work a lot with Verify API, which is like a two-factor auth API. And with that, if you make requests and you don't confirm with the PIN code, eventually you get blacklisted. So sometimes I have terrible connection. So sometimes it's just better to be able to use a pretend version of the API. I'm building one of our SDKs at the moment, and the number of API requests I make, I think my manager would get fed up of topping up my account. So the mock version is great. So Prism, where's my terminal? Let's just kill off this because I don't need it. Okay. So this is Prism in action. And again, it's npm install Prism, Prism mock, name of OpenAPI spec. So the user interface is really simple. It comes up like this, and it tells you about all the different endpoints that it understands, and it's listening. So you can read the last line, which says Prism is listening on localhost 4010, and that's its default port. You can control it. Now come with me back to Postman, where by the magic of environments, I can flip over to Prism, repeat this request, and have it return all sample data. So this is everything that's coming from the OpenAPI spec. Prism also supports requesting some different responses. So if you have a bunch of example responses, you can request those. If you want to get error statuses, see how it looks when you send a bad param, it does that as well. So you can test a bunch of things by using Prism. And I'm using it so much just for testing things. I don't need to wait to hit the real API or put my real creds into the demo or whatever it is. I don't need to do that. I can just straight away have it locally. It's fast, it's quick, and all the fields are correct in terms of format. I mean, then it has to go and survive contact with the real thing, but the specs match. So actually it works pretty well. We had one where there was a feature that we were launching at an event. We don't do this very often, but it was a big thing, and it was a marketing thing and whatever. The feature wasn't quite ready. So we agreed on a spec. We created the SDKs, we being the developer relations team. The engineers shipped the feature, both according to the spec. And yeah, on the day, we plugged it all in and everything worked. And for me, that's the magic of this. It's not really about, oh, we're Vonage, we use API specs and everything's amazing. It's for the advantage of people who have to integrate with these things. It does help internal API development, but the power is in other people using it and us. Definitely. I missed a whole load of chat questions. So wouldn't it be better if Postman could consume OpenAPI without a separate format? Wouldn't it? That's not fair, actually. Postman lets you do all kinds of extra really custom stuff that's just for Postman. So it's like having API documentation, but the colors are also defined in the spec, right? And I don't want that. Content, presentation. And Postman kind of has that you can set up some tests and things. I don't want that. I just want a reusable API thing that I can use with lots of different tools. Is maybe there's a tool to generate Postman collections from OpenAPI. Mark, there is a tool, but also Postman supports import, so I haven't understood which of those we should do. One thing that I think might be useful, and you can tell me if you think it would be, is somehow in the documentation labeling, like press this button to do a thing with Postman. Yeah. Okay, another question. What do you think about API blueprints when it's compared to OpenAPI? I'll be honest, I haven't used API blueprints specifically, or Raffle, which is the MuleSoft one. I think API descriptions in general are a good thing. I love OpenAPI because it's open, because it's easy for people to get involved. I think the thing with OpenAPI is it's some of the big players collaborating on a spec that we can all share. It's intentionally open. Because OpenAPI is open, the tools are open. So I can pick anything and change my mind. I don't have to get a license and then I'm stuck with it, or I can't add another collaborator, or some of those other tales that I hear from other parts of the API landscape. Like, that's not a thing. So I haven't used the others, and maybe they're superior, but I see lots of companies coming over to OpenAPI. There are lots of conversion tools around. And because it's open, the tools are open, there's no reason to not interoperate with OpenAPI. So I'm a huge fan. Awesome. So I've shown you a bunch of stuff. OpenAPI in the API space, in my opinion, which is fairly humble, but not totally. OpenAPI is a brave new world. It's changed how we develop APIs, but it's also changed how we manage the developer experience on APIs. And I wanted to kind of come here and show you this. I'm going to prompt Faye to put up the last poll, if we can have it, just to kind of round it off and see where you started and see where you ended up. I think there's a bunch of things here where we can do the work to build the docs, but by doing the work to build the spec and generate the docs, we get a bunch of other things for free. So we get the mock servers and the Postman import that let other developers integrate with our APIs, and us. Support team use this a lot to debug things. I am using the OpenAPI specs to generate SDK code, which you didn't see today because I'm the maintainer of the Go library. We have PHP people. Dragonman Tank works for us. They don't need me on that side. And I generate the SDK off the spec. It's not just for documentation, and it's magical. What's interesting about this is I've been speaking on this topic for about 18 months. And in that time, I've gone from, it's the best way to write docs, to, oh, look, I can do this other stuff, to, oh, now I'm generating client codes from it. So who knows what will be in this space next time. Faye, can you pop up my last poll, please? Yeah, who knows what will be in this space if I was to give this talk in another 18 months? It's an open platform. So, for example, I am a contributor to OpenAPI. The upcoming 3.1 release will support webhooks. So, when you send an SMS with Vonage, you can sign up to get a delivery receipt. That's a callback. It's an incoming HTTP request that happens as a result of you sending an SMS. So you make an API request, and then we send you back a webhook at some point when we get your delivery receipt. You can also receive an SMS. That's not a callback. It's not a result of an earlier API call. That's an event happened and now I'm telling you about it. So it's a webhook. We're not currently able to describe those in OpenAPI. In the next release, we'll be able to. I wrote that proposal. because it's an open spec, right? They have open meetings and an open issue list, and you can make a proposal and go and pitch it and write the spec changes. And if the technical steering committee think it's solid and going to be useful, they accept it, which is what happened. That's why I like this spec. Hi, Alistair. Are there framework-specific API builders, such as a recent version of Symfony? So there's a bunch of different things. Look up OpenAPI tools, which is a Phil Sturgeon Matt Trask project. Wait, not that window, hold on, this one. Look up openapi.tools. And there's all sorts of different tool types, lots of different things listed there. And look at the code generators. I know there are some for Symfony. How recent are they? How good are they? Are they just for consuming APIs or for building APIs to publish? I don't know, but I'd love to know. So let me know on that. Sorry, Faye, you still have the poll up. Do you want to show us the results? Okay, woo. So I love that you picked the troll options. Too much YAML. I'm really interested to know kind of how you felt about this. So sounds interesting. I'd like to try it out. That's super nice. Because if you're using this stuff, probably it's on your radar, but if you don't have a reason to work with it all the time, then like where would you come across this stuff? At your favorite user group, of course. So yes, I'm really, yes, good, happy, thank you. Mark Taylor is saying API platform can export OpenAPI, which is Symfony powered. That's useful. Andreas has linked us through to Postman docs on working with OpenAPI. Good. So I feel like I've started the conversation and you can manage this between yourselves. Awesome. If you have any last questions, please type quickly while I wrap up. I think your takeaway links are going to be, and I'll put these in chat once it's not my turn, definitely openapi.tools. I'll share the link to the Vonage API specs as well if you're interested, or just go to developer.nextmo.com and hit our API reference. If you want the coupon code, let me know and I will share that too. Yeah, no, I think that's it from me. I mentioned webhooks just there. I'm streaming on webhooks with the aforementioned Chris Tankersley tomorrow. So if you want to see that, we'll be on Twitch at 3 o'clock London time talking about webhooks. Are there some example repositories to test this? This is a good question. So for API specs, there's a classic pet store API spec that you can find on the OpenAPI initiative, like OpenAPI homepage examples, or you're really welcome to try the Vonage ones as examples as well and just see how they look with tools, make some calls, make me give you the coupon credit. Awesome. Hey, I think we're done here. So unless anyone types any questions really quickly, I can just hand back over to Neil. Or not. Neil?
Sorry, I was looking at the chats coming in. I was like, brilliant.
I'm like, he was here a minute ago.
Yeah. Lorna, thank you so much. That was fantastic. I think you've created quite a buzz there looking at the chat. And I think when you were talking about the example there where your engineering team was setting up an API and the DevOps team were expecting this API to come in for the event, and I was expecting that to go a different way, to be honest, like that too many of those stories often do. So
honestly, until I walked out on the exhibition center floor and saw the demo, I didn't really believe it myself.
But I think that highlights kind of the importance of having something that's so well specified that everybody understands. Of course, we write specifications like every day, contracts every day with our interfaces and in our code. But I think that just kind of takes it to a level where different systems are going to talk, and I think that's absolutely fantastic. So thank you so much for coming in and presenting for us tonight. That was absolutely wonderful.
You're welcome.
I'm gonna share my screen now. So if I share, I hope I'm sharing the right one. Yeah. Can you see a big thing saying meetup script?
Yes.
Fantastic. I did. What I've done before is going to share my screen and just exited Zoom meetings. I'm not too good at hitting the correct button here. So the first one we're going to raffle off tonight is the Martin Fowler's refactoring book, which is very kindly provided by Gaurav from Level 5. And Level 5 have got an upcoming Symfony project coming up, and they are looking for a contractor or a permanent person to join them. So Gaurav, if you want to pop your email address into the chat, if anybody's looking for a placement, then get hold of Gaurav after tonight. Here we go. So winner of the book here. So 121 yeses tonight. I think there's about 50 people have joined today. So let's shuffle these RSVPs. And the winner is Marcin. Marcin, are you with us today? If that's your avatar, let us know if you're there. Oh, I've lost the chat now though. How do I get to the chat? Marcin, are you with us? You have about 20 seconds to say to put a yes into the chat. Otherwise, I'm putting the next person in.
I cannot see Marcin on the list.
No. Okay, fine. So right, Oliver, are you here, Oliver? Or Jakob, if you can see an Oliver in the list, that would be fantastic. Why do they do this?
No, unfortunately not.
It's the scourge of meetups everywhere. Okay. Digs in. Oh wow, what an avatar that is. Are you here? We'll get one.
I don't see anyone of this name on the list.
Fine, we'll get one eventually. I think there's Kane. Is there a Kane here? With a tiny, tiny avatar. Doesn't help, does it? Let's do that. Bang, bang, bang. Do we have a Kane, Jakob?
No, sorry.
Okay, Josie, I know Josie is here. Joe, you have won a copy of Refactoring by Martin Fowler. I've got Martin in my head now. Martin Fowler. So that's for you. So everybody applause for Joe, please. Yeah, sorry, virtual applause. Okay, next we are going to do, we've got 2 JetBrains licenses to hand out. Of course, you can use them on PHP Storm or DataGrip or C-Line or anything that you want to use it for. So let's just run through this again. So we've got 2 of these to give away, and I certainly do hope that we find a winner quicker. So, Florian, are you here today with us this evening to collect your prize?
Not on the list.
Oh. See, all these people could win so much stuff, and all they had to do was turn up for free. Okay, is there a Zach here tonight? Zach, if that's your avatar, you have won.
No.
Gaurav, you have won a JetBrains license, and we'll send that over to you. Wonderful. It's okay. So, and I'm going to hit no anyway, so we don't go through the shuffling thing. And we're going to second JetBrains license is going to Faye, who is I'm assuming Faye is never going to use JetBrains. She's one of the workers for Spinks, one of their kind hosts. So I'm gonna reshuffle for you. Okay, do we have Vladimir here? Oh, Vladimir, you have got a tiny avatar.
I don't see him on the list. Sorry.
Okay, I'm not gonna bother zooming in there. Right, repick. Ajesh, is there Ajesh?
Yes,
here?
he's on the list.
Fantastic, Ajesh. You have won the second JetBrains license, and you've come into the chat as well. Look at that. We've got double confirmation there. Well done, perfect. So that's 2 JetBrains licenses and a book to go out. We'll get your contact details and we will ping you a JetBrains license over the next day or 2. So well done, everybody. who's won. So fantastic. I will stop sharing my screen now. And what's going to happen now is Marek's going to come in. He's going to show you some a really fantastic presentation about building apps with Symfony with some real world applications and examples. And then we're going to have a panel discussion with him, which Jakob is going to lead. Unfortunately, I have a prior engagement tonight and I need to drop out. So Jakob is going to drive the meetup from now. And everybody, I'm going to sign off. But thank you, Lorna. Thank you, Marek, for coming in. Thank you to all the sponsors. Have a wonderful evening. And hopefully we'll see everybody in person at some point in the relatively near future. So, so have a wonderful evening, everybody. And I'll see you all soon.
Have a good evening, Neil. Over to you, Marek.
Right, so can you hear me well? That's a
Very well.
question. Okay, good. So Neil said that it's an amazing presentation, so I think he was talking about someone else. Why is this screen? Okay. So a little bit of an introduction to myself. You probably know me from Twitter, but I mostly complain about airlines and things like that. So I don't really post much on Twitter tech related, which I think it's a shame from my side. But what I wanted to talk here today to you about is recently I've been laid off and I was going through a number of kind of like cycles. You know, recruiters approached me and then I was put forward to the company and had a couple of interviews, had a couple of tests to be done. And interesting fact I've noticed is that many companies ask you like questions, like for example, what is solid principles? And then we talk deeper with them and it's like, you know, oh, we use Laravel. Okay, fine, you use Laravel. So why are you interested in solid principles if you use the framework which actually breaks, breaks all of them? Like, you know, using Laravel access to the database is basically model knows how to access database by itself. So it's kind of like breaking the very first principle. But so one of these companies I was applying for, they asked me to create kind of like a presentation application, little API, probably not as good. I mean, it doesn't have a feature like OpenAPI specification, which Lorna was talking about, and what I would really like to try now. But I shared that with Jakob at some point and asked him for his opinion, and Jakob came up with a brilliant idea that I should have a talk and share my experience. So whatever you see today in this talk and whatever I say, it's highly opinionated. It's my approach, and if you agree with it, it's fine. If you disagree with it, I would like to hear your opinion. It's as I said, it's highly opinionated. It's what makes my life easier, and unfortunately, or fortunately, I'm a lazy developer, so I don't like to spend too much time coupling myself to frameworks and other tools. So I try to keep my stuff simple and kind of like easy. If you hear anyone anyone is looking for a Symfony developer and you think I'm good, you can feel free to recommend me. That's a shameless plug, sorry. And one more thing, it's very weird talking to a screen where I can't see people. So Lorna did great, so hopefully I'll do okay. So I have prepared a code example. Unfortunately, I was not able to use the code example I shared with Jakob some time ago, so I had to create something kind of equivalent or similar. The code example is a basically like a little API which is supposed to help. It's supposed to help the train station manager to manage the train station they work on. So I've created a couple of list of a couple of simple rules what the train station should, what the API should do. So a couple of basic rules is that any station should have at least 2 tracks with long platforms. That each track will have a number and can have a platform. It doesn't have to have a platform. The platform can be either short or long. And a train will have a number and will have a type. And now the type determines what the train can do at the station. So the fast train can just go through the track without platform, or it can go through the track with a long platform. Now regional trains can stop at the long platform, but not on the short platform, while local trains can stop at any platform. So this is kind of like a basic brief about how the application should, what the API should do. And this is what I've implemented, and I would like to take you through a little bit. The dev stack I've used on it, it's Symfony Flex Skeleton, and I specifically say here that I don't use the website skeleton. The main reason for it is that Flex Skeleton has basically nothing included. It's just a dependency injection and just basic wiring, and that's it. So if you build an API, you basically have nothing in the application. You can just start writing code and add whatever you need as you go. To help me develop quicker and hassle-free, I use Docker and Docker Compose, mainly because I don't want to install Node on my computer. So if I have to use Node.js or NPM, I run it via Docker image. Each application can have their own PHP version setup or their own dev stack. I can run a number of databases. Like one project can use Postgres, other project can use MySQL, another project I might want to use MariaDB or CouchDB or Mongo. Docker images are available for all major products. It really simplifies development, and I don't have to install anything on my computer. And I can just run one command I can just run one command to basically get a repository from GitHub and have a working environment without worrying about external dependencies. I also use Traffic reverse proxy. This is a little tool which helps me avoiding, picking ports where to expose my API. It's quite neat. It basically assigns like a domain, localhost domain for every Docker Compose setup you've started. It just requires a couple of labels in your Docker Compose YAML file, and then magic happens. I also create my own makefile where I set up a couple of handy tools. So, I don't have to, because I might not have PHP installed on my machine. So running PHP may require, running tests may require to run them in Docker environment. So to simplify that, I just have a shortcut methods. It will be all shared in GitHub repository afterwards, so you'll be able to have a look and see and comment. If I happen to use anything for front-end, I go for Webpack and Core. I personally struggle with JavaScript and front-end dependencies, so I avoid touching that, but I found that Webpack and Core and Yarn pretty efficient to manage dependencies for the front end, and it works pretty well. I've recently done it with Bref as well, which is running PHP in serverless. It worked beautifully. Okay, let's go next. Testing. Testing is quite important to me. I like to start writing code from test. It's not always like that, unfortunately. In a real life, when you build some prototype, you usually just start writing code. But if I do a professional work, I like to start with writing tests. My preferred stack is using PHP spec for unit testing. So it's basically specification. So you write specification for code, and then code which is sufficient to pass the specification. Then I use Behat for acceptance / functional testing. I like Behat, especially in a professional environment, because it's using Gherkin scenarios. It allows easier communication, easier approval with stakeholders reading scenarios or providing scenarios or contributing to writing scenarios. Feel like empowered that they actually have a say in how the application is shaped. So it's a pretty cool and neat technique to kind of get stakeholders involved, if you wish. Then I use PHP unit for integration testing. For example, testing if my repository writes to database correctly. Yeah, what's that? Now, the most important bit, or the least important bit, or the most difficult bit for me, it's usually naming things, and I struggle with naming correctly, and I think naming in programming is the most difficult part. Names, the way you name classes, objects, methods, it does matter. And as Lorna said in her presentation, it's important to think about the name, because it's a descriptive kind of message going forward and will be used in the future. So if you have a very clear and descriptive class name or method name, developers will know how to use it. If the name is kind of confusing, then it will lead to errors and confusion. So yeah, as I said, it's that easy if you think of it, or it's very difficult. Right. So I said in the talk that I would like to go through a couple of solid principles. Probably everybody. Okay, so I started in a different way. At basically every single interview I had, I was asked about solid principles. And maybe my understanding of solid principles is wrong, or maybe developers who I was talking to kind of had no good understanding of solid principles, or they don't use them. To me, it's kind of like a bread and butter. It's I don't have to think about using them. It's just like it's kind of embroiled in my brain that, you know, the way I try to build application, the way I try to think of code is just like, if my class starts getting like 4 dependencies for whatever reason, then I instantly know that I need to split it. I'm not thinking about which principle to use. It's good to know principles, kind of like from the academical point of view, but it's part of your experience, right? It's don't know, maybe I'm completely wrong about that, but I had a brilliant idea to show you a couple of to go through the principles and show you a simple example which embraces all of them. So let's start. The first principle is a single responsibility principle. It's the easiest one because it's self-explanatory. Everyone knows what it means, and that's it. And the question here usually is what it really means in practice. Does it mean that, single responsibility doesn't mean that when you have a controller, does it mean that the controller can have many actions and possibly multiple different dependencies? Or does it mean you should have just one action? So let's say if you have a list of list of stations, and then you have another controller action to display information about particular station, would you have two controllers or one? So it's I would say it's difficult to say or hard to say. In my opinion, if the controller depends on just one dependency, so on the stations repository, then you probably can have multiple methods, multiple actions in the same controller. But you might find a situation where your controller will start growing because each action will require a separate set of dependencies. And then suddenly you may end up having a controller with 4 actions and 8 dependencies. That becomes too big, and in my opinion should be split. Another good example is like when you have a repository class and you want to add caching or logging, whether you add it in as a dependency to existing repository, or maybe you use decorating pattern to decorate that repository and to apply, like extend the behavior of the repository class by composition rather than inheritance. Open close principle. So that's basically for me. It's a decision between you want to go for composition or inheritance. And Symfony by default suggests lots of inheritance. So when you create your controller, the recommendation is to extend the base controller, abstract controller, and then it comes with all the goodies you want to have at hand. But it ties you closely to the application, to the framework, and it kind of stops you from it ties you closer to the framework, and then changing anything is moving that controller to different framework will become a hassle, because you kind of have to extract lots of dependencies and inject them in a different way, or replace them with a new new dependencies. Also, it becomes difficult to test, because suddenly you don't know what's happening in an abstract class. Abstract class is not the bit which you control, and in the future that abstract class might change, and the behavior of that class might change. So you can kind of shooting yourself in a foot, because today it works, tomorrow it won't work, and your code will fail because you were not aware that there were changes in upstream code. So open close principle to me is basically is that avoid inheritance, avoid extending abstract classes, and try to make every dependency explicit. And if you want to add a extra behavior to a particular class, use the decorator pattern to wrap that class into another class, implementing interface, common interface, and adding functionality. Risk of substitution principle. The principle is basically about subtyping. So if your class implements an interface, and your your controller requires an interface. It's a basic basic function of the language, basic. So it's kind of you can have multiple. It allows you to have multiple implementations of the same interface. It's kind of like a contract between your application, what your code, what you want the code to do, and how you want the code to communicate with some other parts of the application. So the perfect example is here. It's we have a find station interface, which exposes which has one public method, which is find one by station ID, and should return station. So that station can be interface can be implemented by station doctrine repository, or that can be implemented by, let's say, station in memory repository, which we use in testing. Then our controller doesn't really know which one we're going to use, but it knows that we're going to use find station, so the interface, and it expects the interface to it expects the class to behave in a particular way. Interface segregation principle. So the idea is very simple. If you have an application, it's if you build an application, you probably start with just one, let's say, track repository. But going forward, and when you split your code into smaller chunks, you split your controllers into smaller one-action controllers, it may make sense to split your interface into more specialized ones, talking about one action rather than multiple actions, being like more specific rather than less, being more specific and less generic. So it basically allows you to split services into smaller bits and provide and basically like the implementation will be for those applications I struggle, sorry. The implementation of those the implementation of those interfaces will result in smaller services providing required functionality. Dependency inversion principle. So I think that one is the one which people struggle the most with. Usually is dependency inversion principle. It's kind of like dependency injection. Dependency inversion basically means that when you have a code, when you write an application code, it will depend on database, it will depend on a template, it will depend on UI, it will depend on the external APIs. But you don't know how those APIs behave. You don't know yet which database you're going to use. So instead of like implementing a particular database driver directly into your code or your application, you kind of extract that, like hide it behind the interface, and then basically what happens is that your policy layer depends on a service, but that service is not defined. You basically create a contract in the form of interface. So your policy layer expects that there will be a kind of mechanism layer which will provide required behavior, which is defined in a contract in the form of policy service interface. And it can go multiple levels depending how complex and how structured your application is. So perfect example is if you have a stations repository. So if you have a station and you have a, let's say, a command which needs to save which needs to find a station. So it doesn't know whether you're going to load it from database or from from NoSQL database or from API. So you create an interface, find stations with method, and it relays that there will be a service which will provide that functionality. So a single example to show that. This is from the application I've built. What happens here is I have a up translation track doctrine repository, which is basically a doctrine implementation of a track repository. That doctrine repository class is decorated by logging track changes. So it's basically whenever this repository basically acts as kind of like a marking, adding trains to like assigning trains to track and then freeing the track from after the trains leaves. So we want to log that information. So this is this is the decorated service. But now the application itself relays on the smaller parts of the interface, on the specific interface. So we have one dispatch train for track and dispatch train from track. But we know that the track doctrine repository implements track repository, which implements those two, which extends those two interfaces. So we can substitute the specific interface with more class. We can substitute them basically. So we have a single responsibility principle in here because two services do two separate things. Doctrine repository loads data from doctrine or saves data in database, and then logging is done in a separate service. We have a separation of interfaces. We have substitution, and we have a dependency inversion, which is dispatch train, which is basically those two interfaces. Right, that was stressful. Yeah, this is where the code is. If you want to have a look, and yeah, someone just asked if I was willing to share. Yes, this is the code is shared on GitHub, and I actually have a code in here as well, which I wanted to do a small demo. Right, so I said that I have one simple method to run it. So many developers have that. You run make dev. It installs everything what you need, creates the images, sets the application up, runs tests. It's done. It runs. Then I can. This is a Postman. I can check that my application is working. It is working. Not sure if you can see it, but this is basically the domain which traffic is creating for me. It's train station, but that's the folder name, docker.localhost. Very simple. I don't have to think about anything. I just add 1 or 2 lines of code to my setup. And if a person I share that with doesn't use traffic, they can either install traffic easily, or they can just add a 1 line to Docker Compose, expose the port they want, and it doesn't break anything. So my API has 2 train stations. Yeah, with tracks and yeah. Okay. So the first thing I want to show you here is, so as I said, I like to write, I like to use Behat to kind of describe the application behavior. So here's my feature file, which describes different scenarios for the application. Those scenarios are basically a direct translation of the rules which I presented at the beginning of of the application. So we have a first scenario is just a basic one. Local train can stop at the track of a short platform. So we have a train station with a couple of platforms. When we dispatch a local train with number, the train should arrive, should be on that assigned to that platform. So I'm going to show an example in here. So this one. So I have no trains assigned as right now. I've cleared the database, but I was making sure that everything will be working for me. So I'm going to assign to the Paddington station, which has a couple of long platforms, short platforms, and empty platform, and I'm going to dispatch a fast train. According to the rules I've set, the fast train should be dispatched to a platform without a track if one exists as a preference. So let me reload that. So the train could go to the long platform as well, but it didn't because there was a platform with no there was a track with no platform, and the train went to that one. Here we go. If I dispatch another train, so let's say different number, so it goes to another empty platform. Platform A is empty. I will reload, and we have 2 trains dispatched. Yeah. Now, if I dispatched yet another train, different number. Yeah. So now the train arrived at the track number 1, which is a long platform, because there is no tracks without platform available for the train to arrive to use. Now I can. Okay. So yeah, that's it. It's a simple application, but it's kind of uses a couple of techniques. So the first thing I wanted to show is the bit I showed earlier regarding repositories. So in my application, I have a command called dispatch train dispatch train, and that one single action for my controller is quite heavy. It requires just one handler, but it's lots of going on in here, and I just don't like. It's already 50 lines long, and to my liking, it's becoming too big. So it unfortunately does 2 things, but I just did it for simplicity. I could make train being done in the argument value resolver. So instead of creating one from JSON in here, it would be created in a resolver, so I wouldn't see it in the controller. So that bit would go away. But basically, this action is down to dispatch train handler, and which handles the command dispatch train, and catching a couple of errors which might come from the dispatching. So if there's no track available, you get an exception, and if invalid train is dispatched, you may get an exception as well. And as a result, it redirects to the specific track which the train was dispatched to. So as a result of the action. So then I have a track controller action, which is less lines. It's just 40, but I have 2 actions in here, mainly because both actions are kind of tiny and small. But I probably should split it into 2 separate controllers with 2 separate actions, with each controller with one action only. Coming back to our track doctrine repository, it implements track repository, which is basically which extends to interfaces, and watching each interface is one dependency. they're used in two different contexts. One is to dispatch the train, another one is to free the track. But it's the same Doctrine repository, so I kind of I made a shortcut to make it easier for me to create just one repository class. Yeah, and then this is our decorator, which decorates track repository. So it takes as a dependency track repository, but also implements track repository. So classic decorator pattern, it does what it needs to do, so logs information in here, and then calls the parent method to the decorated class to execute the action. Why I like this approach, it's because I can have a different logging mechanism, or I can have a caching added on top. I may want to cache before logging, or I may want to cache after logging, or I may have a different levels of caching. Or I may want to modify results in some way. Then shuffling like decorated repositories is simple. You just change the order of services being decorated in your services YAML instead of trying to modify your code and change the way code works. Yeah, okay. Okay, so I think we can go to questions. If there are any questions, I can't see them in here.
There's no questions yet. Marek, could you show us how, where are your Doctrine entities and how do they look like?
Oh, that's an interesting one. Doctrine entities. So two things in here. I have models in my code in the train station in a namespace called train station, and I have a station model which has a couple of business logic embedded in here. For example, dispatch train. So it can check if the train can go to the right track and dispatch that, and if the track is not available, it throws an exception. But this model is not the Doctrine model. I keep Doctrine entities separate. So I have a basic station entity, which basically it's which once loaded from database, it gets converted into standards like the model domain object model. So it's kind of like a data. It's not even an entity. It's just like a. It's kind of like a data representation, data object. Yeah, loaded directly from database, and then cast into the object I actually want in my domain.
See, it's very simple.
It's very simple because it doesn't do anything.
I like that there's no noise. There's no. Some people might argue that it's duplication. You have the same concept represented in two ways, but it's actually. I feel it's more like there's two separate responsibilities here. One is persistence, and that's what we call station entity, and then your model is where you have your business logic. Quite nice.
Well, if I wanted to do it in even like separated in a better way, I would actually put all my business logic in a separated repository, which has no knowledge about it's a pure code that has no knowledge about anything, and it's just pure PHP. And then in my then the Symfony Flex application would be just a consumer of that code, like as a separate as a dependency, and then you can basically build a Symfony application around it. That makes sense. But
how do you write this entity back to the database? Sorry, I'm calling it entity because Doctrine is calling it entity. It's not an entity in the DDD terms, but it's an entity in the Doctrine terms.
So in this case, in this application, I have no writing to database, right? So so the good example is my station is aware of has a station ID because I need it. My track entity has a unique ID, but it's a concept only known to the database. It's in my domain. I have a tracks ordered by number, so I don't need a extra ID to kind of have a unique ID across many stations. But in this application, I don't have a writing to the database. So if I had it, I would probably have something like I would have two methods. So one would be on the entity would be public function from public static, probably from track, and that would create entity new self, entity UID would be UUID Monday, UID 4, entity track number would be I need to add the track in here.
People are suggesting you forgot about specs.
I wouldn't write specs for such a simple class, but yeah, there should be a spec.
By the way, are you going to open source this project? There's multiple questions about it.
It should be as a MIT license in GitHub, right?
Oh, is it open yet?
Yeah, it's public.
I'll try to copy the link.
Yeah, it has a MIT license. MIT.
So are there any questions to Marek? Don't be shy.
Oh, yeah, I have no. Yeah, so there are two ways. I can create entity from a track, or I can do it directly in the repository. I can have a public function persist.
There's a question from one of the attendees, Marek.
Yeah.
Would you use the same approach for larger domains and multiple people on the project? Is there something you would like to improve?
It depends on the project, really. Depends what the. I've used that approach on one of the projects in the past, and it worked really well. And that was 4 people working on the project, but we were kind of like working all together very closely. So that was relatively simple. We kind of worked together, same team from the start of the project. The reason why I would use this approach and is that you get a good documentation in a form of Gherkin scenarios. They're easy to read and easy to understand, and they kind of explain quickly what the application is doing at the kind of like a acceptance level, and then when you use PHP spec is kind of the same. You can just search for the object you're looking for and read what it's doing by reading the function names. So either in the file or checking the running the spec with a specific file.
Mm-hmm.
So in PHP spec.
So do you feel this approach is better for bigger projects or smaller projects? Or does it make a difference? Or is not a good categorization of problems?
I don't think it's so. It depends what you're doing. I mean, to put that thing together, it took me maybe 6 hours, 7 hours.
Mm-hmm.
It's lots of code written, and it took me relatively little effort, I would say.
You can't say that. All the effort is in your past experience, I would say.
True. The past experience, it's a huge contributor to that. I mean, as an example, I had a short assignment a couple of weeks ago where I looked at the Laravel application, and application was written in a way that it was the perfect example, active record pattern, right? It's the way Laravel does things by default is that your model is it's coupled to the database connection. So it just assumes that you know what fields database will have. It's kind of like a one-to-one mapping, and it's you can't even in the code see what fields are in your model, which to me it's kind of like a mind blown. And like, how would I know what it does? It's just like it's not a model. It's merely like a structure, like a struct from C, or like a like an array, but just like standard objects.
There's a few more questions since we started talking.
Yeah.
So one's a bit out of scope, but is there some reason why you don't use binary UUIDs?
No reason. I just used UUID. I use UUID version 4 mainly because I've used them most of the time, and on smaller projects they don't matter. It doesn't matter really. There was a discussion which I was part of on Twitter some time ago, which ones are better. So if you need sorting, probably you want to go for UUID 6, and if you want smaller footprint on your database, you might want to go for the binary ones. But in this example, it's irrelevant. It's up to you.
It was just a side question.
Yeah, sure. The one thing I wanted to add is if you look at the code, where's station ID? So my model station depends on the station ID, right? I have a station ID final class in here, which could be an interface, and which would mean that, it could be in your infrastructure implementation, which means you could define your station ID the way you want it. It's just decoupled from the model, and it's just to identify properties. So
it's very clean.
It gives you freedom basically to I personally don't like the auto increment. So for me, the IDs are the UUIDs, the kind of like the thing to go.
All right. There's a couple of questions about your test tools. So questions like why PHP spec and not PHP unit? You can get the same output with PHP unit test docs switch. And then there's...
okay, let's go one by one.
Okay,
I don't know how to... Okay, go on then.
Okay, go on.
Why
later?
Why I use PHP? Why I prefer PHP spec? I don't know. it's I can use PHP unit the same way. Professor can be used with PHP unit. I was not aware of a tool to generate nice docs from PHP unit. I don't know. It's just a habit and just preference. I kind of like the verbosity of PHP spec and asking questions and helping me to write code quicker.
I see. Yeah, that second question is very similar because Thomas says using PHP spec plus bhut plus PHP unit seems quite a nice setup. Could you sum up of the plus points of that versus just using PHP unit for all of testing?
So in my experience, when you use just PHP unit for, so yeah, I know that you can use basically PHP unit for all of your testing, but in my experience, developers get confused, and you get PHP unit, you get unit tests leaking into your your integration, and then integration tests leaking into your unit test suite. It requires kind of lots of strong will and be vigilant to make sure that you have unit tests in your unit suite, and you have integration tests kind of like separated. PHP spec will prevent you from making like will prevent you from writing like code or trying to even test stuff which you don't own. While if with PHP unit you can basically do whatever you want. So I find PHP unit kind of like a little bit lower level, kind of like a PHP unit is powerful. You can run. It's kind of like a runner for any type of testing you want. PHP spec, it's kind of like more opinionated. It's kind of like tailored for just one specific way of writing tests, and I kind of like it. And I kind of like it that I have them separated.
Makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Steve, have noticed that you're writing SQL queries in your repository instead of using Query Builder. How come?
Just easier.
Short answer.
I mean, I could write a query builder. Yes, I could use it. It's to me, it's an implementation detail. I mean, this is a example, and yeah, and I just wanted to see it works.
Yes. Yeah, I was looking at it as well. I like how you use your doctrine entities as kind of a read model only. Yeah. And then any updates go with SQL queries. Quite easy. You don't have state there to worry about.
That was the purpose of it. That's what I said. It's like if I wanted to have a persist method, I would probably do data track. So that method returns me an array, and I just insert this into the database.
Could you show us the mapping, your mapping to the database? Do you have any mapping? You should, I guess.
Oh yeah, I use XML for mapping. And where is my mapping? It's in here.
See, nice. Are there any more questions from the audience?
The mapping, the good question here is that if you notice that I don't use any prefix, so I can actually map a domain model if I want it directly to doctrine. So I also keep anything which is not domain related in infrastructure folder. So I have a doctrine in here, in-memory representation for my station repository. which is, again, find station is just a root model. And yeah.
Tarmo have responded to your PHP spec versus PHP unit question. He says, okay, that really explains a lot. Personally, I have used PHP unit for all those, but I have separated my tests to test suites. E2E tests, real client requests, functional tests against the database, for real services, integration, tests that my services are talking to each other correct way, lots of mocking there. And finally, unit, no mocks at all, real unit tests. With that setup, I can easily see how to use PHP spec behind PHP unit setup.
Yeah, so it's on a larger projects you may end up having number of level of tests and different integration levels of tests. So you may want to use Behat for acceptance, which is just about code, and you don't care about database access, but you can use Behat with database access and having like a smoke test. You may have a separate functional test in PHP unit. I personally have nothing against PHP unit. I actually quite like PHP unit. It's but as I said, I just like verbosity of PHP spec, and kind of like I like to separate them in three big buckets, which is integration, acceptance, and unit. So yeah, but at different projects, it might be more buckets, and the same tool might be reused for multiple different testing levels.
Right. Are there any more questions from the audience? Your last chance. Otherwise, I think you can easily reach Marek on Twitter, or just create issues on his repository just published.
Yep.
Ask questions, have a look. It's a very nicely done example project. There's some thank yous on the chat, Marek, for you. Oh, there's a question. Is there a reason why you don't use annotations for your entities?
Yes, there is. And I actually recently done a project where I use annotations for my entities, and I found them harder to read. It might be a result of the fact that basically most of my career I've used XML, and it's basically easier for me. The other reason is that if you use IDE, IDE will help you how to complete XML mapping, and it won't help you with annotations.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I use annotations for my controllers though. Which annoys me in PHP Storm, because as soon as you add a root annotation, it complains that the doc block is missing parameters. But if you remove it, it's fine. No more questions?
Right, no more questions. Any closing remarks, Marek?
Closing remarks. I don't know.
There's a suggestion where you just hit Alt-Enter and change that setting. There's a suggestion for you from the audience. Just hit Alt-Enter and change that setting that annoys you.
How do I change it? It says update, Alt-Enter. There's no option to disable it.
The top one. But that's not going to do what you want to do, is it?
That's not what I want. I mean, this is I have everything. Sorry, I have everything type hinted in here, so I don't need a obsolete like super.
Yeah. People are suggesting you can disable it, so
I'm pretty sure you can, but I probably didn't spend enough time to look for it. Yeah.
Nice. Well.
Okay, so the closing remarks is that if anyone has any questions, I'm free to chat anytime via Twitter or via GitHub, and yeah, feel free to ask any questions you want.
And thank you very much for joining us and showing us your way of coding. I think it's very, very interesting and valuable for others to learn from and get inspired. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And gracias, goodbye from Spain. That's the last comment.
I don't know how to read the comments. I don't know where they are. Maybe if I stop sharing, I'll see them. Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, I can see. Ah, okay. Cool. Lots of messages. Awesome.
With that, thanks everyone for joining us. Hope you join us next time. Maybe after lockdown is over, we'll get back to real life meetups. Who knows?
The pubs will open soon.
So thanks for joining us and see you next time.
Bye.
I need to learn how to stop this thing.
It's okay, Jacob. I'm going to end it now.
You got it covered.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye.